Friends, so now start with graphical representation of cardiac cycle. As we said, heart behaves like a machine in which pressure and volume changes can be accurately measured, and these pressure and volume changes could be expressed in the form of graphs, right? So we are going to make many graphs and learn about their interrelations. It's going to be really very interesting, right? So let's start first. Let's start first with contraction of atria. Huh? So contraction of atria is obviously increasing the atrial pressure, right? Contraction of atria is increasing the atrial pressure. So we'll get a loop like this, right? But in the phase of atrial contraction, the atrioventricular valve is open. This means that any increase in atrial pressure will also increase the ventricular pressure by the same amount, right? So this will also lead to increase in the ventricular pressure, right? Now, when the ventricular pressure crosses 5 to 6 millimeters of mercury, which significant change is going to happen? As soon as the ventricular pressure crosses 5 to 6 millimeter of mercury, our atrioventricular valve are going to close. That means atrial pressure and ventricular pressure will become completely independent of each other, right? So, and one interesting thing about our next phase is that our atrioventricular valves have closed, but the pressure inside the ventricle is yet not high enough to open the aortic valve. To open the aortic valve, the pressure inside the ventricle has to increase all the way up to 80, right? So in the meantime, our ventricle has become a closed cavity. Atrioventricular valve has closed, but aortic valve is yet not open, right? So closed cavity. And this phase is called isovolumetric contraction, right? Use black pen to draw the lines. Right? So, one interesting thing about the phase of isovolumetric contraction is that our pressure inside the ventricle is going to increase exponentially, right? Let's draw one more line over here, right? Our pressure inside the ventricle is going to increase exponentially during this phase, right? And over here we have got our aortic pressure, right? Our aortic pressure will be steadily declining till then over this point something interesting happens. Now what interesting thing happened at the end of isovolumetric contraction, right? Let's label this stage as isovolumetric contraction, right? What interesting thing is going to happen at this point? Ventricles are continuously contracting, increasing the pressure from 5 to 15 to 20, 30, 40, 50, 60, 70, and finally 80. As soon as the ventricle crosses the pressure of 80 millimeter of mercury, the aortic valves are going to open, right? As soon as the aortic valves open, this aorta and this ventricle becomes the same cavity. Now, both the pressure inside the aorta and ventricles are going to change at the same time, right? So, obviously, when aorta opens, the blood will start rushing from the ventricles into the aorta. So, ventricular volume is going to decrease, but the ventricular pressure will continue increasing because ventricles are still contracting, right? So what we will see over here is basically the ventricular pressure will keep increasing, 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 right? And along with that, our aortic pressure is also going to increase, 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 increase. Then after some time, there will be a decrease. This initial phase, where both the ventricular and aortic pressure keep increasing, is called our rapid ejection phase, right? This thing is called rapid ejection phase. So of course, after some time, since the ventricular volume is finite, right, as this ventricle pushes blood, the volume of the blood will continuously decrease inside the ventricles and the pressure is going to eventually fall. So our next stage in which the pressure decreases is slow ejection phase. So even after 80, the pressure inside ventricle will increase to 80, 90, 100, 110, 120, right? It will reach up to the peak of 120. After that, the pressure will start decreasing, right? 120, 110, 90, 80. But as soon as the pressure inside both the ventricle and aorta falls below 80, something interesting is going to happen. What will happen? Our aortic valve will close. And this thing is significant. If aortic valve closes, the pressure inside the ventricles and pressure inside the aorta will become independent of each other, right? So this is the point. So this is the point where aortic valve is going to close, right? And if aortic valve will close at this point, this means that both the aortic pressure and ventricular pressure will become independent of each other. Now, what else interesting is happening over here? Aortic valve has closed, right? Suppose pressure is 75, so it's not high enough to keep the aortic valve open, but it's high enough to keep the atrioventricular valve closed. So aortic valve has closed and atrioventricular valve is yet not open. So ventricle will again become a kind of closed cavity, right? So this will lead to our next interesting phase called isovolumetric contraction, right? In isovolumetric contraction, no blood is entering ventricle, no blood is leaving the ventricle, but this is the phase where the relaxation of the ventricle is happening. That means pressure is going to fall at exponential rate in this phase, right? What we will see in our phase of isovolumetric relaxation is basically this. The pressure inside the ventricle is going to fall exponentially, right? We'll come back to this. But the pressure inside the aorta will stay more or less the same. Enter into, because the valve, aortic valve has closed, right? And what will happen to this thing? Our pressure inside the atria, it will show a small loop over here, right? And the people who know jugular venous pulse know that this small wave over here is basically C wave. And after that there will be an X dash descent, and after that we will have a very long, right? A very long V wave in which this atria will be filled passively, right? What we will have after this? After this we are going to have phase of rapid passive ventricular filling and slow passive ventricular filling. Two more phases we will have after this. Rapid passive ventricular filling, it's no atrial contraction, but the flow of blood is rapid, right? And slow passive ventricular filling, right? Now we will correlate this kind of graph with our ECGs, right? Now suppose over here this is because of atrial contraction, right? So just before the atrial contraction, which wave of ECG is responsible for atrial contraction, right? Our P wave of ECG is responsible for atrial contraction, so we will have P wave just before the A wave of JVP, right? And over here we have got our isovolumetric contraction, right? For contraction we need polarization or depolarization. We need depolarization. We need ventricular depolarization for ventricular contraction, right? And which wave is responsible for ventricular depolarization? Our QRS complex is responsible for ventricular depolarization. So we'll draw over here, right? A negative Q wave, then a positive R wave, then negative S wave, just before our isovolumetric contraction, right? Now which wave? We have got our isovolumetric relaxation over here. So which wave is responsible for relaxation? We need depolarization or repolarization for relaxation. We need repolarization for relaxation, and T wave is responsible for ventricular relaxation. So our T wave will be just before this point, right? Just before our IVR, we will have our T wave, right? And aortic pressures won't change much during rapid passive ventricular filling. They will kind of slowly decline, right? And even ventricular pressures, though they are being filled, they don't rise rapidly. They kind of get slowly elevated, right? And of course, during this rapid passive ventricular filling and slow passive ventricular filling, they will have Y descent. We will have Y descent of the jugular venous pulse, right? So there will be a slow decline in the pressure over here, right? So let's draw a left ventricular volume over here, right? Let's draw a line for left ventricular volume, right? So in case of isovolumetric contraction, right, there is no change in volume. Let's draw something like this over here. No change in volume. In case of rapid ejection phase, there will be a decrease in volume. In case of slow ejection phase, there will be a further decrease in volume, right? In case of isovolumetric relaxation, no change in volume. In case of rapid passive ventricular filling, our volume will increase. In case of slow passive ventricular filling, our volume will further increase, right? And in case of this atrial contraction, we label this over here, atrial contraction, our volume increases slightly, right? So this is for our volume changes in the ventricle, right? Should we label this? This is blue. This is our for aortic pressure, right? Aortic pressure. This green one is for ventricular pressure, right? ventricular pressure. Then this one is interatrial pressure or jugular venous pulse, right? This red one is for interatrial pressure or JVP, right? This one is our ventricular volume. This one is for ventricular volume. Right? And this one is our ECG, right? This one is for ECG. Right? So it should now be clear. The most upper one is our aortic pressure curve. Just below this, something which varies wildly, is our ventricular pressure curve. Just below this, our jugular venous pressure curve, and this is our ECG, and this green line is the curve for our ventricular volume. Now, how to fit our heart sounds inside this? For this, we need to technically understand why exactly these heart sounds are produced. Let's come to first heart sound. First heart sound is due to closure of atrioventricular valve, right? And when exactly atrioventricular valve closes? Atrioventricular valve closes when the pressure inside the ventricles crosses like 4 to 5 millimeter of mercury, right? And when this ventricular pressure crosses that point, and after that, which stage start? After closure of atrioventricular valve, stage of isovolumetric contraction starts, right? So our first heart sound will be located just before the line of isovolumetric contraction. So our first heart sound will be, let's draw this with blue. Our first heart sound will be located somewhere over here, right? So this one is S1, right? What exactly second heart sound is due to? Second heart sound is due to closure of semilunar valve, which includes aortic valve and pulmonary valve. So when exactly aortic valve closes? Aortic valve closes when pressure inside this combined cavity of ventricle and aorta falls below 80 millimeter of mercury. When it falls below 80 millimeter of mercury, aortic valve closes and the phase of isovolumetric relaxation starts. So where is our isovolumetric relaxation over here? It is here, right? So when phase of isovolumetric relaxation starts, just before that phase, we will have our second heart sound, right? So this is our first heart sound and this is our second heart sound. There is also something called third heart sound. Third heart sound is basically during the stage of rapid passive ventricular filling, when blood rushes suddenly from the atria into the ventricle without atrial contraction. Rapid passive ventricular filling. Peculiar thing about third heart sound is that it can be physiological or pathological. It can be physiological in children, it can be physiological in teens, especially who are tall, right, who are still growing. So in them it is physiological. The blood can rush suddenly from atria to ventricles and produce some kind of sound, and it's very physiological. But it is pathological if found in older individuals. If found in old people, third heart sound signifies heart failure, right? So where exactly we have got our stage of rapid passive ventricular filling, right? Our stage of rapid passive ventricular filling is over here, right? So within this stage of rapid passive ventricular filling, we will have our third heart sound. Now there is something called fourth heart sound. Now one most important thing about fourth heart sound, that it is always pathological. It is produced when a hypertrophied atria contracts against a hypertrophied ventricles. It's a very strong contraction, right? Hypertrophied atria contracting against a hypertrophied ventricles, leading to vibration inside the ventricle. And when this ventricle vibrates, this vibration produces our fourth heart sound. So when exactly, in which stage we are going to have it? We are going to have it in stage of atrial contraction, right? So in stage of atrial contraction, we will have our fourth heart sound. So we will have fourth heart sound somewhere over here, right? So fourth heart sound will be found in this stage, right? In the stage of atrial contraction. One more important thing to observe over here is that just look between S1 and S2. What we are having between S1 and S2? We are having isovolumetric contraction, rapid ejection phase and slow ejection phase. So all the phases between S1 and S2 are basically systolic phases, right? So any murmur which is found in between the S1 and S2 is basically a systolic murmur, right? And any murmur which is found after S2 and before S1 is basically a diastolic murmur, right? And systolic murmurs can either be physiological or pathological. There are certain diseases like thyrotoxicosis and anemia and even hyperdynamic states. Systolic murmurs can be either physiological or pathological, but diastolic murmurs are kind of always pathological, right? This is one of the differentiating points. And always remember a clinically very important point: any murmur between S1 and S2 is systolic murmur, and any murmur after S2 and before S1 is basically a diastolic murmur. So if you just look at the graph all at once, you will find this graph to be very kind of complicated, and you might say that you can't follow it. But if you draw with your own hand in a step-by-step manner, starting from the atrial contraction, the closure of atrioventricular valve, freeing of the pressure between the atria and the ventricles, the ventricular pressure increases on its own, right? I mean, every time a valve closes, be it at this point or be it at this point, the pressure inside the cavities become independent of each other. Here the atrioventricular valve closed and the atria and ventricular pressure becomes independent of each other. Here the aortic valve closed and the aortic pressure and ventricular pressure became independent of each other, right? Here atrioventricular valve closed, over here our aortic valve opened, over here our aortic valve closed, right? So it's like beautiful interaction of so many factors, right? If you just try to understand it in a step-by-step manner, you are really going to enjoy it, right? Hopefully you enjoyed this session, and hopefully this basic information will help you. This will help you make a basic format in which you can fit other information which you learn from other sources. So hopefully it helped you out in creating that basic format, okay? And in case of any questions, you can write in comment section, and best wishes for your future. Take care. Bye bye.